the camera's angled out a little bit for y'all to be on.
Yeah, so
like it's aimed right at you, Emily.
yeah, it's actually Riley, you're like in the middle of the camera.
You mean check YouTube? Well, I can check YouTube.
Yeah, we can check YouTube though. We're live.
We're live. I've never seen iCarly. Nope.
There you go. Oh, that's weird. It's gonna be a weird start. Woo.
We'll just leave that on. Is Instagram live? We on Instagram too?
Yes, we're on.
Not that.
Kirby, you're right across.
If anybody was watching, they're probably here.
Right over there too.
I mean, y'all can watch just to give us people on that are watching, but I don't know. I don't know how it works.
You know what?
Is it delayed 30 seconds? Oh, geez. Well, welcome. Anybody's watching. I don't know if anybody's watching. Like I said, ones that are watching are probably here that we're watching. But just in case, good to be here again tonight. Cooler, not as hot, which is nice. Kirby's in a jacket even. That's how cool it is. Yeah. So announcement was, I don't know that I have any announcements. I don't know what church is going to look like next Sunday, if it'll be outside or inside.
Is it week to week? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of. It was hotter last week. Last week it was the hottest day of the year, so it was hotter last week. What? Last week? Oh, I don't know what it was.
So hot.
Yeah.
No, it was 94, I think.
By the time we got, it was the hottest when we came to youth group. It was like 95 at that point in time. I don't know what it was that morning. It was hot though, and humid.
You were in a long sleeve shirt.
No, I was.
Last week? Were you in shorts today? Always. Yeah, so I don't know. We will have church next week. I just don't know if it'll be inside or outside, and we'll keep doing this outside for the time being. Kirby's hot. I'm trying to think if I don't really have anything else announcement worthy at this point in time that I can recall. Y'all have anything noteworthy going on? Ellie's getting braces on Thursday. Nice. Emily's getting hers off. Lydia got braces last week. Oh, this is Lydia. I don't know if y'all met Lydia. Yeah, she has a peanut allergy. Don't give her peanuts. So anybody else, anything exciting happening this week for anybody? Anybody going anywhere? Do anything exciting? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Awesome. Is it your first time? Yeah. Yeah. Exciting. You ready? You got it. You got it. Cool. I don't have anything else. You have anything else, Bo?
No. Do you have anything to say about anything that might be happening next month?
Still working on that.
Okay.
I told him, didn't I tell you last week? So Rush is canceled. Yeah. But we might try to they're doing virtual. We might try to do something here. I just had to figure out how that's going to look, how we would do it. Okay. But yeah, same date, 6th through the 10th of July. Try to figure that out. Okay. So we're going to talk about a familiar story tonight in Luke chapter 10. If you have a Bible, you can pull that up, or if you have an actual Bible, you can turn there. Nobody brought an actual Bible because you're all. I told your mom you could bring it. Jeez. Yeah, so we're being Luke chapter 10. So we kind of finished up last week as we were talking about prayer. We talked about laments, and we got into a little bit of kind of into current events. And things that are going on in our city and state and country and around the world, dealing with racial reconciliation and those issues. And we had some discussion, I think, after we went off video, right? But I figured this week, as we look at this story, I think it puts in context some things to think about as we think about this time that we live in. Like, we live in this time that's we're just divided. Like, we can find so much to be divided over. We can find a way to make somebody our enemy. We might find a way to make somebody a bad guy in whatever situation. And we tend to want to kind of group up into our camps, and whatever that is, whether it's a sports team or a political opinion or whatever. We want to like get around people that think like we do and believe the same things that we do. And those are the people we want to kind of group up with. And so we're going to kind of get into some of that tonight as we look at this story. So just to kind of, as we start, I was thinking back to the beginning of this shelter in place thing that are we still doing it? It's over, right? I don't know what we're doing. But that first week, or right going into that first week, when, there's a lot of unknown, still a lot of unknown, but I remember going to the grocery store and there were like out of stuff, right? Like things that they would normally have. And I went in to get 4 things. And as I'm walking in the aisles and I'm like, they're almost out of, spaghetti noodles. Now I know we have spaghetti noodles at home, but I'm like, I should probably get some spaghetti noodles because people clearly are buying them, right? And as you walk through the store, you're like, I need that, even though that's not something I actually need, but there's not enough of it. It doesn't look like there's enough of it. So I want to make sure I have some because it clearly looks like that's not going to be available. And it kind of like points to that kind of sense of like self-preservation that we all have, that, we all kind of get centered on ourselves of like, how does this affect me? Like, how am I going to be affected by whatever is going to happen? And that's our first thought in whatever situation comes. And so, walking through the grocery store and something I might not have ever wanted, but all of a sudden there's not enough of it. And I'm like, I better have some of that because what if I want some? And so just that kind of that mindset of like, how does this impact me? How's it going to impact my future, my ability to do something, my security, my safety, my comfortability, all those kind of things are kind of the priority that kind of comes up in us in any situation. And that happens like you guys that live in homes with brothers and sisters, right? Like you're always focused on making sure that you have what you want, and primarily first, right? You're like, I want the best donut, I want the biggest piece of cake, I want the biggest, that's all of us here, right? Oh, Anna just looked at that's or like I can call Anna out because she went and got shotgun today quickly after church. So like, but it's always that. It's like, how am I gonna get what I want, right? Like, am I gonna get the thing that I want? And this story that Jesus tells of the Good Samaritan is challenging that idea of like not looking to your own interests, not looking to the thing. And we talked about this on Wednesday night in Bible study, but not looking to the thing that we want, but looking out for other people. And he has this exchange with this expert in the law. So that's kind of what we're going to talk through tonight and read through out of Luke chapter 10. So you guys are familiar with the story, but do you think they probably can't hear if I have somebody read, can they?
Sure they will.
Somebody want to read the first, let's go starting in verse 25, Luke chapter 10, verse 25. Let's read the first 2 verse 25 and 26. Somebody read that for me. Luke 10, 25 and 26. Thank you.
And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And
That's fine. So again, we're familiar with the story, but this is the way the story starts. A lawyer, a teacher of the law. So we're not talking about lawyer in the sense of what we think about lawyers today. These are people that are experts in God's law and in the Bible, in the Old Testament law. And so he stands up to test Jesus and says, and asks the question, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus' response to him is asking him, well, tell me what is written in the law. How do you read it? And then the guy gives his answer. And so Jesus responds with a question, which is usually frustrating when somebody asks you something. Like if somebody asks you, or if you ask somebody a question and they respond with a question, that can be kind of frustrating, right? Like you're like, no, I wanted you to answer me. I don't want you to question me back. But Jesus is pretty smart, right? And so Jesus kind of turns it around and asks him, well, you tell me, you're expert in the law. You tell me what the law says about this question. And so he kind of flips it around on him. And so that's where he picks up. So read, Emily, you can keep reading, or somebody else can pick up and read 27 and just read, 27 through 29 and see Jesus' response, the man's response and Jesus' response. You can do it unless somebody wants to shout out, they'll do it. Go ahead.
And he answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live.
All right, so the teacher of the law quotes Leviticus 19 to Jesus. This is, and Jesus also affirms this in his own teaching. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus says, okay, you've answered your own question. Like you came and asked me this question, and you've now responded, and you have answered rightly, and do this and you will live. Now, he's not advocating saying that if you do, it's not works-based. He's just affirming what the Old Testament law has said and affirming what he himself says when he quotes the same passage in other places. And so he responds to him that way. And so that word neighbor that is used is a word that's feels like it's limited in scope, right? Like if we use that word neighbor even right now, you would quickly, your idea of what a neighbor is the people that live next to me or the person sitting next to me. Like we have like, we can narrow that definition of neighbor pretty quickly to like, okay, it's these people, it's this person. And what really had happened in, as what Jesus is responding to and what this guy, as he's saying that, is that idea of neighbor had become limited based on what had happened. So these are Jewish people living under Roman rule, and they had kind of narrowed the definition of neighbor to mean like Jewish neighbors, like the people that were like them, and that's who he's talking about. And so that in that response, so Jesus kind of leaves it simply at that. And then that's not the end of the conversation. The man continues in 29, and it's important. I want to talk about this in verse 29. So Jesus responds, and then 29 says, but he, the teacher of the law, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And so let's just stop in that little piece right there as we think about our world right now. Desiring to justify himself, he asked, who is my neighbor? When the teacher of the law is saying, ask this question, he's not asking for information. He doesn't really want Jesus to give him information. He doesn't want Jesus to answer that question. He wants to affirm what he already believes about who his neighbor is, right? And I can't help but see that and look at the way that our world currently is as we think about the world of social media and everything where people put their opinions out there, and we get like locked into these places where we only hear the things that we agree with. And that's kind of what this guy's doing here. He's asking Jesus a question, but he really doesn't want to know the answer to that question. He wants to be told what he already believes about something. And all of us kind of get wrapped up in that too. We kind of get locked down into a viewpoint about something. And so right now, as our country and world is dealing with this racial issue, we get locked into things that we already think about this. And so if we have an opinion about law enforcement, positive or negative, we get locked into that viewpoint, and we get blind to being able to see like, well, I support police. And so we lose kind of like what's actually being said about, well, can we not think about how law enforcement might be done a little differently? So we get locked into that thing. And so we just want to put out there, like, I think this, and I don't really want to be told anything different. And we don't want to interact with things that challenge our understanding of things. We don't want to, engage in hard, difficult conversations. We just want to be told what we already believe about stuff. Do you guys see that? Do you guys feel that even in your own life at times? Like, I don't really want to, because it's hard, right? Like, I don't want to be, I don't want to have to use my brain. I don't want to have to like, I want to just get a lot of affirmation about what I already think about things. I want to feel good about the things I already feel about. I don't want to be challenged that my viewpoint may be wrong. I don't want to be challenged, but with something that might change the way I think about something. I don't want to be challenged with something that might cause me, I might not change the way I believe, but it causes me to interact with what I really truly believe about something. We just want to be comfortable in our own place. You know, we don't want to be unsettled in those places. And that's really what this guy is doing to Jesus. He doesn't really want the answer to this question. He just wants, I mean, it says he wants to justify himself. He says, who is my neighbor? And Jesus is going to kind of flip that around as he gets to the end of the passage. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Does that like resonate with the way that we see the world through the lens of social media in particular right now? That like, I like the pages that I like, and I get information from those pages, and I don't interact with things that I might challenge that viewpoint. And again, I'm not advocating that like there are things that we might get, like there are true things we need to believe, but our true things we believe also need to be challenged. Like we need to like know why we believe the things we believe and not just rest in those things, because then when we are challenged, sometimes those beliefs can be shaken. And so we want to make sure we understand and believe. We don't want to just justify ourselves. We want to know why it is we think the way that we do and interact with things that challenge us. Yes? Is that clear at least? Does that make sense? You want to add anything to that, Bo?
What is that? I mean, like, I don't want to say like anybody know an example, but I have an example. I don't know. Does anybody have an example? Does anybody understand? This is just to make sure that we all understand what's going on here. But does anybody have an example of this that you've seen in your own life?
I know my brother would only like on social media, like only follow like the political groups that he believed like in, and like with anything else he would like block and just go on hate comments and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and it doesn't necessarily even always have to be political stuff either, right? I mean, like we can look for the word for it is confirmation bias. That's your big vocabulary word for today. Because you were looking to have things confirmed to you, just like the teacher of the law was looking for. He's not wanting to learn. He's wanting to just. It can be like, for instance, Kirby. You would never entertain an idea that anything is wrong with the Denver Broncos, right? You would only want to think good things. You'd only want to hear good things. And if anybody had anything to say that was contrary to that, you would be like, that doesn't exist. That's not real. I don't believe you at all. Okay, fair enough. Okay. But it's like, it's just, we want to hear the things that, I mean, it makes us feel good about ourselves to an extent too, but it also is like, it's harder to be challenged, It's harder for our brain to be challenged, and we don't necessarily want to be challenged. So, anyway.
Yeah, sports teams are a good one because, like, that's definitely true. Like, when I read about the Titans, I only want to read good stuff. I don't want to read negative stuff. Don't tell me negative stuff. No, I'll justify that. I mean, and we do, like, I mean, even like with sports teams, like if they're on my team, I'm going to be in favor of them. I'm going to have a hard time seeing past the fact that they're on the team. So, I mean, that's just me. That may not be you, but that's just me. So that's kind of where this guy is. He doesn't really want the answer. And it's even reflected in the way he asked the question, which we'll get to in a second. He wants to know who his neighbor is, and Jesus is going to turn that around and say, that's the wrong question. And so, all that to say, like, this guy really just wants Jesus to affirm what he already thinks about who his neighbor is, and doesn't really want to be challenged by that. But, the question that he asked, who is my neighbor, is he's actually asking, who do I actually have to care about, right? Like, who do I have to love? Who do I have to extend grace and forgiveness? I mean, who do I have to treat that way? Because there are people I definitely don't want to treat that way. Like, that's what's kind of framed in that question. He's not asking that question because he wants that definition to be very broad. He wants it to be very narrow. He wants to be able to say, I only have to treat people as my neighbor who are Jewish or who are like me, or I'm going to extend this into our current, who are white or who are a person of color. Like I only have to treat people that I like, that I want to a certain way. The rest of the people I can exclude from this idea of what a neighbor is. And so he wants to make the definition very narrow and draw lines and be able to definitively say this group is a neighbor and this group is not. And I don't have to do that with this group of people, and I can do it with this group of people. He wants that to be the case. He wants the world to be set up that way. And the reality is that's kind of how our world is set up right now, right? Like that's how culture kind of divides us, is that I'm only allowed to have affinity and care and relate to people that are like me and that think like me and have the same experiences as me and whatever. That's maybe too simplistic, but it feels that way a lot of the times. That's kind of how we are. And so, he asked that question. And so Jesus launches into this familiar story that we all know and is going to challenge that question with this story. So the story is the parable that Jesus tells is in response to this question, is in response to the narrowness of the question and wanting him to like broaden his understanding of what a neighbor is. And so that's where he gets into the story. And he's going to challenge this guy with the way that this story plays itself out, as you guys are, I'm sure, aware. So somebody read the story that Jesus tells. Read through 35. So 30, right? Yeah, 30 through 35. Somebody read that for me. Yes, please.
Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back.'"
Sorry. I was trying not to do that. Yeah. So again, we're familiar with this story of the way that he sets this up. And so, just to kind of put it in context, this is not, Jesus is not telling this story to criticize the priest and the Levite. Like that's not the way that the story is framed. He's not doing it as a criticism of anybody. He's setting the priest and the Levite up as an example because they are people that the people hearing the story would respect. And so, if we took it into our context, like even right here, we would say, well, so Pastor Robert and Pastor Greg walked by and they passed the man by. So it's not meant to be denigrating to them. It's meant to be because the turn that he's going to make with the Samaritan is supposed to be shocking. And right. So he's holding up the pillars of the Levite and the priest and saying, these guys walk by. And the thing is, the people hearing the story are going to understand that with the context with Jesus telling the story, this road that the guy's walking is a known dangerous spot. Like it's a place that people shouldn't be walking down. It's a place where it was common for this to happen, and so it was a dangerous place, right? It was a bad part of town, and so for the priest and the Levite as they walk by, like there's a lot of justifiable reasons that we could give for why I'm not going to stop and help that person, just as much as all of us would have a justifiable reason why we might not stop and help somebody in a bad part of town. So think about whatever bad part of town you want to think about, like Sale Creek. If you want to think about a bad part of town, and as you're on your way driving home, so you're by yourself in your car, and you pass somebody on the side of the road that is broken down on the side of the road, and you're like, I do this all the time. I should stop and help that person. Well, what if XYZ? Like I have a number of things I might make up about, well, what if I can't, some of them are, mundane, like things like, what if I can't help? Or what if, whatever it is, or some of them are more like, what if that person wants to do me harm, or what, like, there's a lot of reasons why I might do that. And there are times that I have done it. So, there was one day, years back where, April was working at the sugar shop, which isn't there anymore on East Brainerd Road. And I was going to see her, and I was driving through East Ridge, and that Burger King there, right as you get off the interstate. I stopped and got lunch or something, and there was a guy that was like, "Hey, I need a ride. Can you give me a ride?" And I was like, "Okay." And I gave this guy a ride, and it ended up being like 2 hours of my day. I took this guy to this place, and he went and like he left me in the car as he goes to this house. And I'm like, is this guy like robbing somebody? Like, what am I doing here? And I'm waiting on this guy. Like, am I going to get in trouble? Like, all these things are going through my mind. And so I take him there, and then I take him somewhere else, and I take him back to the Burger King. So like 2 hours of my day is gone dealing with this guy. And all through this time, I'm like, what is going to happen to me? Like, how like I might get hurt. What's this guy going to do? And so again, all of that's justifiable. Like nobody would hear me, any of you say, I wanted to help, but that looked dangerous, or, I was worried about what might happen to me or whatever. Like nobody would be like, oh, you're a horrible person. Like that's justifiable. And that's kind of what Jesus is setting up here is like, these are justifiable things. Like they walked by this guy. It's not that they necessarily were completely cold to the fact that somebody needed help. They were thinking about all the other implications that might be. And so all that to say is that when Jesus makes this turn and brings up the Samaritan, it's meant to be shocking. It's meant to put in contrast to these people that these people would have respected to somebody that they definitely wouldn't respect, like to the Samaritans, which, as we've talked about before, is like, there was prejudice and racial issues and political issues and ideological issues and theological issues. Like there were all these issues surrounding what these people thought of Samaritans. And so when Jesus holds up the Samaritan as the hero of the story, the people hearing it are meant to be like, okay, hold on a second. Like I was with you until you went there. Right. And so if we fill in that blank, like if we were to bring it in modern context and fill in that blank with something that would make us feel that way. Right. And we could go all over the place with this, right? We could go something simple like, but the Tennessee Vols fan is the one that stopped and helped the person, right? Like that would be a problem, or the Alabama fan, or whatever your particular team. And you're like, no, it can't possibly be that person because those people are awful. They like orange and it's ugly. Like that's so it was meant to be that. Or if we spin in another direction and we say, Jesus, it wasn't the pastors of the church. It was Donald Trump himself. Like he stopped and helped the man. Like that would be challenging to people, right? To think that would be the case, to make that turn. But that would be an equal twist in the story. It's like it's a challenge to us, and so fill in that blank with whatever it is. And so whatever people group or person or thing that's out there that you're like, you know what, I don't think I could ever get along, or when I think about that type or that group or that person, I could never imagine them being that kind of way. That's the person that Jesus wants to put in this to fill in that blank with. And so whatever you could fill that blank in with, in your own kind of like mind of what that is, that's what Jesus is kind of wanting us to see here, is like, that's the person that does that. And so fill in that blank with whoever you don't like whoever represents that group of people. Like we're on video, so we're not going to go into all the depths of who that possibly could be. But like the people that we have issues with, that becomes the person in the story that helps. And that's the person that Jesus used. And so Jesus uses somebody that would have been a touch point. It would have been very sensitive to the people hearing the story to hear that person be made the hero of the story, to be made the one who exhibited these behaviors. So, at the very mention of their name, there's a reaction, right? And so whether we bring up Black Lives Matter protesters or white supremacists, or like whatever case it is right now, whatever side, whatever way you want to kind of split that's who Jesus kind of says that's the one who takes on the role of the neighbor in this story. And so that's what we're supposed to feel. It's supposed to trigger us. It's supposed to be something that's like, whoa, hold on a second. And so that's what the people would have heard. And that's kind of what we need to hear in the story. But think about what the Samaritan does in the story. The Samaritan, it says the Samaritan, as he journeyed, he came to where he was. And when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him. He bound up his wounds. He poured oil and wine. So there's financial costs at that point in time. Those things cost money. Pours oil and wine, bonds his wounds, not to mention the fact that he's just taking time, right? He's taking time in the midst of his own journey on this dangerous road to help this person. So he bandages the wounds. Then he sets him on his own animal. He puts himself out. He's going to walk while the person he puts the person on the animal as they go, takes him to an inn to take care of him, pays out 2 denarii, which would have been like a month's worth of care for this person. Basically says to the innkeeper, do whatever this person needs, care for their needs in whatever way is possible, like basically fulfill whatever it is that they need to be cared for. And if it's beyond what I paid you, I'll pay you more when I come back. So he's going above and beyond. He's going the extra mile. There's another place where Jesus actually says, if you're ordered to go a mile, go 2 miles. And that's what the Samaritan does here in the story, is that he goes the extra mile. Like he's at every cost to himself. He, as a risk to his own safety, his financial sacrifice, all of these things, he did everything he could to care for this stranger in need and promised even more than he'd already given. So that's where the Samaritan comes in the story. And that's the way the Samaritan treats the person that's been harmed. And so the story finishes in verse 36. It says, Jesus says, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And he said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. And it's kind of interesting that he says, when Jesus asks who was the neighbor, that the man doesn't say the Samaritan. He says the one who shows him mercy. It's almost as if the guy can't even bring himself to say that word, right? It's almost that he's like so repulsed by the fact that that's who the hero of the story is, that he doesn't even want to say it. He just has to kind of like hang his head and say, well, it's the guy that did that. And so Jesus, in the story, he pushes all the buttons. He pushes the political button, the race button, the religious button. He pushes all those buttons to get a point across. And then when he flips it around and he says, which of these person was the neighbor? Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? That's how he answers the question. So the man asks the question, who is my neighbor? And Jesus' response is, who is the neighbor in the story? And and what he's basically challenging the man and all of us to do is to be like that, is to be the neighbor, right? Is to be the neighbor in the story, to be the way the Samaritan the Samaritan has acted. So he says, go and do likewise. And that's the challenge that he gives to the person. That's the challenge he gives to us. And so as we think about our world and the divided place that we exist in, it's asking that question. It's like, what is it? Who is my neighbor in this current climate that we are in, right? Is my neighbor the Trump flag waving, MAGA hat wearing, super patriotic, person, or is it the ultra liberal? I'm trying to think of how we might like what classify, like what would an ultra liberal look like? Pro choice, all those things. What I forgot where I was going with all that when I was trying to come up with an example of those things. Who go and do likewise. Love the other. How are we supposed to care for those people, even the people that we disagree with, even the people that we don't like, even the people that challenge us, that we have a hard time with, that we just can't understand, that frustrate us, that the words that they say, the way that they talk, the way that they act, the way that they behave is challenging to us. And we think about that on a large scale, but it's also like, what about the people in your own house, right? Your brothers and sisters, your moms and dads, your boss at work. Those are your neighbors too, right? And so, on like a family scale, Jesus would say, and your brother, and name your brother or your sister and use their name in that context. They're the one that stopped and helped. And it's supposed to we're supposed to see, oh, that person that I think is not, worthy of my time or worthy of my care or worthy of any of these things. That's the way I need to treat that person. So he says, go and do likewise. Matthew 5:41 says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Again, that was about Roman law, that a soldier could tell you to carry his load for a mile. And Jesus is saying, actually go above and beyond. And so he's calling us to do the same thing, that we can do that as well. And then also I want to flip over to Matthew 25 too, because it also illustrates this whole point as we think about who our neighbor is and think about what that looks like. So Matthew 25, again, another familiar place that we can go. But Jesus is talking about the final judgment here, right? Right? Am I in the right place? Yeah. Yeah, it's where he's separating out the sheep from the goats. You guys familiar with this? So Matthew 25, it starts in 31. But so it starts out, when the Son of Man comes in glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people from one another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food, and I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when do we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when do we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when do we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. Then he will say to those on his left, Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, you did not visit me. Then they also will answer, saying, Lord, when do we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison or did not minister to you? Then he will answer them, saying, Truly I say to you, as you did not do to one of the least of these, you did not do to me. And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. And so that's kind of just, the grandest of examples of Jesus saying to the righteous and the unrighteous, like, are you mindful of the things going on around you? Are we mindful of those things, of who our neighbor is and how we treat and do for others the way that Christ is calling us to do those things? Because Jesus is clearly pointing out in this passage that we are going to come across people that are hungry and need food. We are going to come across people that are in prison and we need to visit them. We're going to come across people that are sick and we need to visit them. We're going to come across these things. And it's when we come across those things in our life, those people in our life, and how we respond to those really demonstrate whether we really understand God's love for us and the compassion that he has for us. Are we living out the love that we say we have for God in the way we act with other people? And, as we think about just even that passage, there's a number of things. I was hungry. I was thirsty. I was a stranger. I needed clothes. All those things. In Jesus' call to us to be a neighbor, calling the righteous in this passage, what could we add to that list? Like, Jesus kind of lays out a lot of things there. Like, as we think about the challenge Jesus gives in the Luke story and then this passage in Matthew, what are some things that are challenging to us? Like, what are some things out in the world? Like, there are people that are something and we need to do something for them. Like, what do you guys understand what I'm asking? Like, what might we add to Jesus's list here of people in the world? Like, I might put, in our current situation, whatever you believe about Black Lives Matter and the organization or whatever, I think we're called to grieve with people that are grieving loss, right? That's something, we could add to that. I was sad. I was grieved because I had lost something, and you grieved with me. You wept with me. I think that's something we could add. Is there anything else you guys can think of that we might put on that list that might be hard and challenging, that's kind of relevant for our current time or just relevant to you in general? Like, what might Jesus say? I was blank and you did this. Anything that you guys can think of?
Homeless and you gave me shelter.
Okay. Yeah. What else? Yeah, that's a good one. One thing I was thinking about with this story is, and thinking about kind of our current time, is like, if we were to update this story and, somebody was, let's just say there's a person in a bad part of town, and, you're walking through, driving through, whatever, and you see somebody just laying on the ground. This kind of goes even to what you said about being homeless. Like, it's almost a little bit, even right now with some of this racial stuff, that our first response, or some people's first response to some of these things are, well, they shouldn't have been doing that. Or what did they do to get there? Like, what bad decisions did they make, or what drug are they addicted to, or how much alcohol do they drink? I mean, that's something, when somebody asks for money, somebody says, hey man, can you spare some change? My immediate thought is they're going to go use it for something they shouldn't use it for. So I'm not going to give them that. I don't want to enable that. But I don't know that that's really our place to determine what they do with it. Right. Like, that's not what's told here. Not that we shouldn't be mindful and wise, but, I did have a guy tell me, I'm going to go buy alcohol with this. Like, he straight up said it. So I gave him money. But it seems like, as we think about this passage and the Good Samaritan story, is that oftentimes when somebody is down and hurting, that we look at them and say, well, what did you do to get in that situation? Right. Like, why, particular, like in this racial conversation, well, they shouldn't have resisted arrest. Well, they shouldn't have this, and they shouldn't have that. Like, we have all these reasons and these things that we say, instead of our immediate response being care and compassion and concern and hurting and grieving with. So does that make sense? Is that, yeah. Any other thoughts? You got any other thoughts, things we might add to that? I was blank and you. Okay. Yeah. I think that one's good. I think it all points to that our response should be driven by compassion and care, and not by our particular political belief or the color of our skin, or whatever category we might put it in. Is that we're clearly called as Christians that serve a God that loves us, that has poured out compassion on us through Jesus, that we're called to do the same thing towards others. We're not called to make arguments. Jesus doesn't say, anything about, well, you defended this whole thing was going on and you posted some statistics on your Facebook, or you don't have Facebook, on your Instagram page. You argued this side, you argued this side well. And again, not that there's not a place for us to have conversation and debate about solutions to problems and problems in general. But if that's our first response when we see hurt in the world, when we see hard things, when we see violence, when we see systemic issues and problems, if that's our first response, then I think we need to evaluate whether or not we're really doing what Jesus called us to do, as believers. Some questions it says here is, one of the things it says is, do my impassioned posts online build walls or create bridges? That's come up recently. If people overhear my conversations, would they be pointed to God, or would my words point them away? These are just ways to think about being a neighbor. What does my focus on money say to my friend whose mother just died alone in the hospital? Like, kind of thinking through our priorities. Do my words and actions send the message that I'm a neighbor, a person to reach out to, or do they warn people off? Does the unmarried pregnant girl think it's safer to go to an abortion clinic than to me? Do my marginalized friends feel I'm someone who understands injustices that happen to them? Or am I unsafe because I will be too distracted by how it impacts my politics, my income, or my comfort? These are hard questions. And then there's this quote by Micah Edmondson, who's a pastor in Nashville. He says this: you cannot love your neighbor while supporting or accepting systems that crush, exploit, and dehumanize them. You cannot love your neighbor while accepting less for them and their family than you do for you and your own. And we believe that in some senses, but we don't believe that in all senses. We could read that and we could say we have a system in our country that allows life to be taken in the womb, and we are passionate about that as a thing. But when it comes to, like, when we think about systemic problems in race relations, we are like, well, hold on a second. Let's think about this from a different angle. Like, we don't want to hear that, and we don't want to. But I can't argue with that statement that if we can't love our neighbor if we accept less for our other people than we do for our own family. And that's the kind of true test. If we could just put ourselves in the position of that person that we're seeing the video of, or the person on the news, or the person saying this, like, what's their position and why are they coming from the position they're coming from, and practice some empathy. So what does it look to love God like that, to be a neighbor? It means sacrifice. It means empathy. Instead of outrage, it means understanding. It means sacrificing security, popularity, status, financial, physical safety for the sake of others. And it means being a neighbor to everyone, not just the ones that I like. And then there's this quote from The Art of Neighboring that says, "In this life, we can do only a few things really well. I think it's a good idea to make certain that one of those things is what Jesus says is most important." And he says that here in the story that we've read. So that's what I have to say. You have anything to add?
Nothing in particular.
Okay, well, let me pray and then we can go off live. Is anybody watching?
No.
Fine. Let me pray first. Is there anything we can pray about for y'all this week? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they had a friend commit suicide this week. So we'll definitely pray for them. Smith family, right? Yeah. Anything else? All right, let's pray. God, we thank you that you love us. That as we think about what it is to be a neighbor, that really the example we look to is Jesus, and the way that he didn't create, any system to say that his love is only for this type of person or this group of people. He opened and said, the forgiveness that he offers is for sinners, and we're all that. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so we get to be that as well. We get to benefit from that love, and we get to then share that love with the people in the world. And I would pray that in our culture of outrage and identity politics and just really difficult, hard things that are happening, whether it's this global pandemic that we're experiencing and the opinions around it, or it's racial issues, injustices that are going on, that there's a lot of opinions on, that we would strive to be a neighbor in all of these things, that we would look to others' interests before our own, that we would look to lend a helping hand or a word of comfort, or just empathy, even just the simple task of being empathetic to somebody we might disagree with can go a long way to lessening these divisions and helping us to be neighbors. So help us to do that. Help us to do that on a grand scale as we look at these difficult things, but also in our own homes. It's hard to be a neighbor to our brothers and sisters that annoy us. It's hard to be a neighbor to our moms and dads that we feel sometimes are overbearing or unfair. It's hard to even practice this in our own homes. So help us to do that well as well, that we would see those around us as our neighbors, that our definition of neighbor is as broad as it possibly can be, that there's nobody that's excluded from our ability to care and have compassion in the way that the Samaritan does in the story, and that we would be challenged by filling in that blank of the Samaritan with whatever people group or person, individual or otherwise, that we might fill in that blank with in the way, and see this story in the way that Jesus wanted us to see it, kind of the shocking nature of it, and that would lead us to seeing with compassionate eyes, seeing with your eyes. So we pray for that. We do pray for Chase and Bailey and Sydney, for their friends' family, for the Smith family, and all those that are grieving this loss. It is heartbreaking and hard and confusing and just all kinds of things and tragic. And just pray that your comfort and peace would be with them, with everybody that's grieving this loss, that you would show yourself real in the midst of great pain and suffering. And so we just pray that for Chase and for Bailey, for Sydney, and for the Smith family and others that are grieving. So we grieve with them, we hurt with them, and so we just lift them up to you. And we thank you so much that Jesus has come, and that even in the midst of tragedy like this and the things that are going on in our world, we have hope. And we grieve with hope in this situation. We grieve with hope in what we see around us, knowing that you will one day set things right. And that's our ultimate hope in who you are. And we get to be a part of that redemption story. So help us to see that, to see the world through that lens. Pray for these guys, the things they've got going on, for those that are out working, that you would protect them, that you would watch over them. We do pray again for an end to this global pandemic, an end to this virus spreading, that there would be some medical treatment, some cure that would render this virus to be non-lethal and to be easy to manage, if not completely eliminated. So we just pray that your hand will be upon those that are working to that end, that you would be with doctors and nurses and others that are on the front line dealing with patients. We pray for them. We pray for peace in the midst of chaos as we think about the protests that are going on in our own city and in the state and our country and the world. That the voices would be heard that need to be heard, that changes will be made that need to be changed, that we would advocate for those that need to be advocated for, and that peace would be the ultimate outcome in these things. And so we pray for that. We thank you so much for the cross, for the gospel, and we pray this all in Jesus' holy and awesome name. Amen. Bye, everybody that's watching.
We did have one.
Who was it?
Neely.
Neely. I saw her at the yard sale. Yeah,
I saw some.
man, they had so much stuff.